One of the things that I learned in my life is that things that surprise me often never happened in my lifetime before, and that I needed to study them. And so I started studying in history, and I found out the same thing happened, leading to the exact same result. I believe that we've entered a period of stagflation, quite like the 1970s. And then the creation of an enormous amount of debt and printing of money to monetize the debt. But it produces inflation.
We now understand better how little we understand about inflation.
That's not very reassuring.
No, honestly, this was unpredicted. A survey of professional forecasters, 34 of them had inflation below 4% for last year. And of course, it was way above 4%.
Everybody forgot about the 1970s, but we're moving into that era. I think we're going to see a lot more price inflation. I think you're going to see a weak economy. I think it's totally out of control, the Fed.
I mean, you just described it. You have a super bad feeling about the economy. Are you still in that position? Joe Biden has just come out and said that a recession in America is not inevitable. How do you feel about the economy?
Well, I think a recession is inevitable at some point. As to whether there is a recession in the near term, I think that is more likely than not.
Because just think of the consequence of rising interest rates on the cost of our debt. Billions and billions of dollars. If interest rates to the government goes up 1%, you're talking about big time increase in the deficit because we'll be paying interest. Right. You know, the NASDAQ, the housing bubble, and we've had this failure of just printing tons of money that didn't work. And now they're going to go to spending money, and they don't even hardly talk about the debt.
Well, I think you make a really good point.
Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong.
The reason why gas prices are up is because of Russia.
What produces it is too much government spending and too much government creation of money and nothing else.
The United States, Canada, and the UK have recently reached a record 40-year inflation. And as Ray Dalio said, the current economic situation is starting to resemble the 1970s, where we experienced an economic and energy crisis sparked by record inflation that quickly evolved into stagflation. If Ray Dalio is right, and our hindsight produces insight resulting in foresight, we are potentially on the verge of the greatest economic and energy crisis of the century. By the end of this video, you will know how to prepare and profit as many informed investors did during the 1970s.
Good evening. 3 weeks ago, I spoke to you about the national energy crisis and our policy for meeting it. I indicated that the sudden cutoff of oil from the Middle East had turned the serious energy shortages we expected this winter into a major energy crisis. That crisis is now being felt around the world, as other industrialized nations have also suffered from cutbacks in oil from the Middle East.
The war in Ukraine has revealed how dependent we've become in the United States and the West on foreign nations for energy commodities. Alarmingly, our overdependence of enriched uranium from Russia. But Russian enriched uranium is not for weapons. It supplies nuclear power plants in the United States and the EU, accounting for an alarming 20% of their annual fuel requirements. Nuclear power generation is 20% of the entire US baseload power. Without this fuel, the power grid would collapse, causing nationwide blackouts, civil disorder, supply chain disintegration, and a breakdown in essential institutions. We saw a preview of this last year in Texas when the catastrophic blackouts left over 4.5 million people without power.
Last week, President Biden followed the lead of Congress and finally banned the imports of Russian oil, Russian natural gas, and coal. But he did not ban the imports of Russian uranium to the United States. Russia is our third largest supplier of uranium. I believe we need to eliminate our dependence on Russian uranium, and I introduced legislation earlier this week to do just that. We also need to jumpstart American uranium production. This includes mining, conversion, and enrichment services. There are only two sources of high-assay, low-enriched uranium in the world: Russia and the U.S. Department of Energy. We can't allow America's advanced reactor developers to be dependent on Russia. So I intend to introduce legislation to first ensure the department is taking the steps necessary to establish domestic enrichment, and second, to make DOE-produced high-assay, low-enriched uranium available. It's the only way to avoid dependence on Russia.
The US also relies on Russia and two of its closest allies, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, for nearly half of its physical uranium. But the US is not alone. Russia also supplies over 40% of the world's nuclear power plants in 32 countries with enriched uranium that could be cut off overnight, causing uranium prices to skyrocket. During the early 1970s, the money printers continued to dilute the dollar after a failed war in Vietnam, and excess government spending sparked record inflation as high as 10%. The Fed continued to raise the rates, causing the S&P 500 to crash 45% from 1973 to 1974. This was around the time that uranium prices started to climb and went from an all-time low of around $6 to all-time highs of $50 in the matter of a few years. But the prices continued to climb. So those that invested in uranium companies early on made a fortune. Did you get all that? Good. Because the same thing is happening again today, and there is a far bigger economic and energy crisis coming. In the US, there is a renaissance again in nuclear energy, sparking one of the biggest financial opportunities in history. Given our current situation, the prices in energy, like uranium, are likely to go parabolic. And this is why. We are already seeing issues, a proposed US uranium ban, and a problem with US utilities already having issues getting Russian enriched uranium delivered that was contracted years in advance. And the US closed its commercial enrichment facilities the last few decades. But President Biden recently requested $4.3 billion for US uranium commercial enrichment, starting a uranium renaissance in the US. You see, there's a coming demand for enriched uranium unlike anything we have ever seen. Long-term uranium contract demand of around 700 million pounds that is about to come back to the market during a time of uncertainty, as well as China, which is on the way to building 150 new nuclear reactors. Because there is a dwindling lack of supply, record demand, and few uranium companies that could produce or enrich uranium in the US, there are a plethora of opportunities. The entire market cap of every uranium stock combined, around 75, is smaller than Zoom Incorporated. There are only a few near-term uranium producers in North America. Those include Uranium Energy Corp, Energy Fuels, Cameco, Peninsula Energy, and UR Energy. Recently, uranium prices hit an 11-year high of around $64 in the spot market. But this was far too low for the majority of producers in North America to get into production. The cost of production continues to rise, so the price of uranium must as well. The US only produced 21,000 pounds of uranium in 2021, compared to the record 43 million pounds in 1980. So when that type of production comes back to these small uranium producers, their valuations could go up overnight. Some of the uranium producers in the early 2000 uranium bull market saw tens and even hundreds of thousands of % returns in stocks in less than 4 years. That was at the peak in uranium prices, which were under $200 with inflation-adjusted prices. Another big catalyst for the uranium market was the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, a publicly traded company that exclusively buys physical uranium in the spot market. In less than a year, the trust has a total of 57 million pounds of spot uranium, which is enough fuel to load the entire US fleet of 93 reactors for an entire year. So this is safe to say that as utilities come back to the term contracting and the spot market, the many new players will fight for pounds, causing the prices to rise to new levels. So there you have it. You're ready to profit during a recession and energy crisis. Now, I've been investing and following uranium stocks for the last few years, and some have already seen thousands of % gains from March of 2020 lows. As of today, the price of uranium is around $50 and climbing. By the time you watch this video, it is likely to be up higher, but that does not mean the opportunity has passed. This is likely to be one of the biggest and longest uranium bull markets we have ever seen, with plenty of opportunities. Thank you so much for watching, but wait, before you click off this video, please do give it a like if you enjoyed it. It will make my day, I promise. Currently, as you watch this video, was Ray Dalio right? Is there an energy crisis or an economic crisis in the US? And does it look like the 1970s? So please, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out and comment below. So go check out some of my other videos as well that I've done already. I am sure you'll enjoy those. I've been making YouTube content since 2005, and it takes a lot to make these videos. So with your support and feedback, whether it's good or bad, it's very appreciated. I hope you are able to learn from the past and hopefully profit during the next energy and economic crisis. Have a wonderful day, and Semper Paratus.